Hello, fellow griever. Today, you have found yourself in a Down the Rabbit Hole episode where we talk honestly about what happens after survival, after the world moves on, and after grief changes shape. I'm Melissa, your host, and today we're going a little bit deeper together. Welcome. So this episode is going to be a little bit different than some that I do. And I know I say that on a regular basis, so maybe I need to just quit imagining what is normal and just assume that everything may be a little bit askew down here in the rabbit hole. But over the last few rabbit hole episodes that I've done by myself, I've been talking a lot about what happens in the years after survival, after those first few years of just surviving. We've talked about survival, hope, and healing, and then what? We've talked about identity after the loss of a child by suicide, and that painful question so many mothers eventually come to. Who am I now? Or maybe, more honestly, I've survived, but I don't know who I am anymore. And today I want to share something that feels deeply connected to all of that. The Legacy Project Volume 7, or as the title is, Because They Lived, Memories and Stories of Amazing Kids Lost to Suicide, as told by the moms they left behind, Volume 7, has now been published. And at the time I'm recording this, we're just about to move into the public launch. I've let the moms who participated in this project sit with the book privately for the past couple of weeks because, quite honestly, these stories, this work, this project is sacred. They deserve the space to be alone with this for a while. They deserve the tenderness and a moment to belong first to them and their families who live with them. But now as we begin sharing the 7th volume more widely, I wanted to read my own chapter for Alex here on the podcast. And I think I've done that just one other time in the 7 volumes I've done this. So it's not something I necessarily always do. But this chapter is called The 7th Thread, What Alex Taught Me About Legacy. And I think it belongs here in this season because this chapter is not only about Alex. I mean, okay, of course it's about Alex, but it's also about his life, his number, his humor, his presence, and most importantly, the way he continues to thread himself through my life. But it's also about what I've learned over the last 10 years. What I've learned about legacy and motherhood, love, grief, even what I've learned about survival and connection and what it means to keep carrying our kids forward. You see, when I first started the Legacy Project, I thought, as you'll hear me say, that legacy was mostly about remembering. And I thought it was about preserving stories and making sure our children were not forgotten. And that does matter. It matters deeply. But over time, and especially through the 7 volumes of this project, I began to understand something different. Legacy is not only about remembering who they were. It's also about continuing the relationship, about what their love keeps teaching us beyond their physical life. It's about who we become because they lived. And for me, this 7th volume, arriving in year 10 with 21 children across 7 books, has felt like one of those moments where I had to stop and pay attention. It's actually how the chapter formed itself, not because I planned it that way, because I absolutely did not, but because sometimes grief, love, and meaning have a way of weaving threads we could not have seen while we were still standing too close to the pain. So today, I want to share this chapter with you, not as some perfect, polished answer or perfect ending, but as a reflection from me, a mother 10 years into the after, a mother who's still learning, a mother who's still being shaped by her son, and a mother who once thought that legacy was about making sure Alex would be remembered, and who now understands that legacy is something so much deeper. It is love carried forward. So I invite you to pull up a comfy spot to sit, maybe find yourself something warm to drink, and I hope you'll listen. And as you do, hold your own loved one or child's name close to heart, and maybe think about the threads they left in your life, the things they taught you, the things you didn't understand then but are beginning to see now, or the things you hope and believe you'll be able to someday. This is the seventh thread, what Alex taught me about legacy. Section 1. 7. For most of Alex's life, 7 meant nothing to me. 13 was always my number. 7 received no special thought. Not until the after years, the life after he died, when that would change. If 7 mattered to him growing up, I never knew. He never explained. I never watched for it as he was growing. 7 was just another number. The understanding that it meant something really came only after his death. After Alex died, Parker told me that 7 had mattered to his brother. He told me that it had mattered for a number of years. He thought it may have begun in middle school when Alex first noticed the number showing up a lot. But what started as a simple observation soon became a running joke among Alex, his brother, and their friends. A Taco Bell receipt totaling $7.07. A gas pump stopping at 777. A jersey number, an address, a random coincidence. Apparently 7 always seemed to find its way into his days. Just a few nights after Alex died, a close group of Alex's friends and Parker gathered at Alex's best friend Tommy's house. At some point during the evening, through the cloud of disbelief and tears, someone noticed a playing card sticking out from underneath the sofa. They pulled it out. It was a 7. Of course, it was a 7, they thought. According to Parker, the boys shook their heads and laughed. Amid this visceral collective grief and pain, they felt Alex reaching out to still be a part of the group. What made that moment even stranger was that no one had been playing cards. There wasn't a deck sitting on the table. There weren't even any cards scattered around the room. Not a deck in sight. Even Parker later told me that they had all looked around afterward trying to figure out where it had come from. Nobody knew. And yet, they all knew. Alex was never one to be left out of a gathering, and in that moment to them, I think it felt as though he was reminding them that he would always still show up. No invite needed. A day or two later was when Parker explained the number's meaning to me. Only days later at our house, I caught Tommy's eye from across the room in realization. I shook my head. What? He asked. Of course, I said. Tommy. He died on the 7th. We both stared at each other for a moment, letting the true weight of that settle between us. Of course he did. And no, I do not believe Alex intentionally chose the date, but I do believe 7 carried meaning for him on a soul level. I see that more clearly now, and at the time, it was definitely still living in the shadows. In the years that followed, though, 7s continued to appear, to come out of the shadows, not constantly or dramatically or even demanding explanation or belief, just enough to remind me to pay attention. Sevens now appear for us in addresses, streets, and exit signs. In moments of uncertainty or confirmation, they show up. Sometimes solo, sometimes in threes. 21 often appears, 3 sevens together. It was Alex's age when he died, and a jersey number he picked long before I understood why sevens mattered to him. Eventually, I stopped asking if these things meant anything else and began paying attention to what they meant to me. The older I get, the more connected I feel to his soul and to mine, and the less interested I am in proving things. What matters is that the appearance of 7 has become a reminder to notice, to pause, or a reminder that not everything meaningful can be measured. Now, what strikes me most isn't that 7 mattered to Alex. It's that I didn't know it mattered. And perhaps, if I'm honest, Alex didn't fully understand, consciously anyway, why it mattered either. He noticed the pattern. He paid attention to it. He joked about it with friends. I do sometimes wonder if the deeper meaning was unfolding for him at all, as it has been for me in the years since he died. There are private parts of our children that continue revealing themselves long after they are gone from this earth. Pieces of them remain just outside our view until the moment that we're ready to see them. Sometimes I think the same may be true for our own lives. We may recognize certain threads long before we understand why they matter. This may be why arriving at Volume 7 now feels so significant. Not because I planned it. I didn't. Not at all. That's the magic of life. So many things simply play out. When I started the Legacy Project, I wasn't thinking about 7 books. Honestly, I wasn't sure there would even be a second. I started with an idea, a hope, and 5 brave mothers willing to trust me with something new joined. I hoped it would help our children be remembered. On the surface, I believed I understood what I was creating. But I didn't. Not really. The deeper lesson of it all was waiting for me. And yet here I am, 7 volumes in, a full decade into this journey, and 21 children whose stories now live on printed pages. 21 mothers, including me, have been profoundly changed by the work of carrying them forward. When I realized those numbers were converging once again, Volume 7, Year 10, 21 children, I stopped and let it all soak into my bones. Again, Alex surprised me, my coy, crafty kid, even in spirit. Surprised not because I needed proof of anything, but because it felt like an invitation to pay attention. The same invitation 7 may have been offering all along, to notice, to remember, and to look just a little deeper. And perhaps, most importantly, to stay open, because some of the most important things we learn about those we love arrive long after we think their story has ended. Part 2, What I Thought Legacy Was. When I first began thinking about legacy, I thought it was mostly about remembering. Maybe initially, more accurately, I thought it was about not forgetting. It was one of the things I heard mothers say most often. I'm afraid my child will be forgotten. The words were usually directed more outward to family, friends, communities, and the world around them. But I felt the deeper truth every time I heard them. Under those words was a mother desperately trying to hold on. We all were. Mothers cling to memories in those early survival years. We gather stories, we save voicemails, we preserve photographs, we turn clothing into quilts and fingerprints into jewelry. We create benches, scholarships, memory boxes, and tributes. We do everything we can to keep from losing more than we already have, as if that's possible. Looking back, I think part of what we're doing is trying to correct the imbalance. If we can somehow gather enough stories, preserve enough memories, and remind enough people that our child was here, perhaps it will offset the pain of their death. Of course, it doesn't work that way, because that's how child loss grief works. It's not logical. It's raw and chaotic and twisting and unwinding. And in survival mode, logic doesn't even get a seat at the table. Like so many grieving moms, I was terrified that time would slowly steal pieces of Alex from me. I worried one day that I would struggle to remember the sound of his infectious laughter, the way his smirky smile took over his face, or the countless little details that made him uniquely him. I fear like that isn't logical. It's purely primal. This fear lives somewhere deep inside a dark cavern we guard beneath our grief. For a long time, I thought that was actually what legacy meant. Remembering, preserving, protecting, so they could never be forgotten. When I designed the Legacy Project, that was my understanding too. I knew we moms needed our children to be remembered. I heard it over and over again. Sometimes they said they were afraid people would forget. Sometimes they wanted others to know who their child really was. And sometimes they couldn't quite find the words at all. What I heard woven into all that was a mother desperately trying to hold on to their child. What I didn't understand then was that memory was only part of the story. The deeper need wasn't remembrance at all. It was connection. We weren't simply afraid of forgetting our children. We were afraid of losing our relationship with them. The photographs matter. The stories matter. The keepsakes matter. These chapters matter. But none of those things is the true destination. They are bridges that carry us back to the feeling at the very root of it all, the love that remains and the connection that continues long after a physical life has ended. At the beginning, I thought legacy was something we created to honor the dead. Now I understand it's something that helps us continue loving the people who shaped us. That's a very different thing. Section 3. The work of carrying him forward. When the first 5 mothers agreed to join me in this little dream project of my heart called the Legacy Project, like I said, I had no proof it would work. I had an idea. A seed had grown quietly over several years, watered by countless tears and fertilized in love, unending love of mothers for their children. I had high hopes, and as my dad would have said, I put it out into the world on a wing and a prayer. And those first 5 moms trusted me enough to join me. I also had a belief that healing could be found in turning back toward our children's lives instead of remaining fixed on the moment or means of their death. What I did not realize was how profoundly the work would affect all of us. The project was always intended to be one part healing and one part legacy. Healing for the mother, legacy for the child. The first half of the journey focused on remembering. We dug through photographs, journals, stories, memories. We revealed moments that had been forced deep beneath the unimaginable pain. I often describe it as digging through the boxes in the basement. Not literally, though sometimes literally. Mostly, we were digging through the quote-unquote boxes we carry inside ourselves. They are the stories, the laughter, the adventures, and the moments that made our children who they were in life, who they still are in spirit. Over and over again, I watched mothers step out of the shadow of their child's death and back into the light of their child's life. That shift changed everything. The number of tears shed across 7 volumes is impossible to measure. So is the laughter. There were moments that took our breaths away. There were days mothers wanted to quit. Days I'm sure they cursed my name. And also days they couldn't stop writing, couldn't stop adding photographs, couldn't stop remembering. There were stories so ordinary and so beautiful that they reminded all of us of what had always mattered most. And there was something else that appeared every single time: connection. As each new group formed, I found myself amazed at how naturally they fit together. Different families, different kids, different lives, yet somehow each group felt as though it had been assembled with intention. The similarities were impossible to ignore. These children were unique, yet they shared so many of the same qualities. They loved deeply, they felt deeply, and cared deeply. They were smart and ambitious and accomplished. Many were creative, many loved animals. Most carried a sensitivity that was both beautiful and made it difficult to navigate in this hard, harsh world. The connections were often so striking that I eventually stopped trying to explain them. I simply learned to pay attention. Again and again, I watched how these incredibly brave mothers discovered they were not nearly as alone as they thought. Their children had different names and stories, different lives, and yet there were threads linking them everywhere. The children taught me that. But likewise, the moms taught me that just as much. Every group showed me something. Each child showed me something. All of the mothers showed me something. I may have been guiding the project, but I was being changed by it right alongside them. What began as a memorial type writing project slowly became something so much larger. It became a witnessing, a remembering, and ultimately a carrying forward, not only of our children, but of one another. Today, when I look back across these 7 volumes and 21 children, I no longer see a collection of books. I see 21 lives continuing to ripple profoundly, intentionally outward. I see 21 mothers who choose, despite unimaginable pain, to tell the story of a life lived instead of allowing the story to end with a death. And I see how every one of them changed me, the children, the moms, all of us. Perhaps that is one of the greatest gifts of legacy work. We arrive believing we are preserving memory. What we are really doing is continuing a relationship and creating life-sustaining connections for those of us left behind. Part 4, what I didn't understand yet. As the legacy project continued, and as I knew at my core it must, after witnessing the impact of the first volume, I found myself writing a chapter for Alex at the end of each book. When I started the first one, I remember asking my husband whether I should even write a chapter for Alex. He laughed. Of course, he said. He's the reason you're doing any of this to begin with. He was right. Thus, I continued to do so with each volume. Still, I intentionally waited until the very end of each project. While the mothers were writing their stories, my focus remained on guiding them, supporting them. Then, in the final weeks or days, often in the wee hours of the night when the rest of the world was asleep, I would sit down and write my own. At first, those chapters felt like an extension of the project itself. I was preserving memories, telling stories, highlighting different parts of Alex's life and personality, his heart, his humor, the synchronicities that appeared after he died. The resilience his loss required of me. And in Volume 6, his life unfolded through the lens of his love for baseball. The chapters were the stories that made up a life. With each volume, I approached the page believing I was writing about Alex. What I didn't understand was what I was also documenting: the evolution of my relationship with him, then in life, but also now in the after. The chapters were changing because I was changing. At first, I thought I was simply preserving the memories. Later, I found myself searching for meaning. Then came connection. Eventually, almost without noticing, I stopped focusing on who Alex had been and began paying attention to how he continued to shape who I was becoming. The shift happened so gradually that I nearly missed it. I thought the work was about legacy, but what I didn't yet understand was that legacy was quietly teaching me about love. Not the kind of love that deepens on a physical presence, but the kind that remains, the kind that changes form but refuses to disappear, the kind that continues shaping life long after death. For years, I believed the greatest challenge was learning how to live without my son. What I couldn't yet see was I would spend the rest of my life learning how to live with him, not simply alongside the grief, but alongside him, still mothering him, just differently. And there's a profound difference between the two. Part 5, Beyond Survival. These things are what the legacy work has given me. They are what it has also given so many of the mothers who have walked beside me. The project began as a way to remember our children. What it ultimately became was a way to begin remembering ourselves, not who we were before, because that version of us no longer exists, but who we still had the capacity to become. Somewhere along the way, the work stopped being only about preserving memories and started becoming an invitation to continue living. The deeper truth is that I no longer believe grief work is about just surviving a loss. We survive instinctively because we have no choice. The mourning period must happen. The keening and wailing, the sleepless torment, the longing is a passage we must all walk through. But survival was never the destination, it was the beginning. The place we land when everything familiar has been taken from us. The place we gather up the leftover pieces after the devastation. Necessary, but temporary. I believe grief work is of learning how to carry love forward, not backward into what was, but on into what still can be. And once you begin carrying the love forward, rebuilding becomes possible. Part 6, The Bridge. Looking back now, I can see something I couldn't possibly have seen when this humble endeavor began. The Legacy Project was never the destination. It was always a bridge, not just for me, but for every mother willing to step onto it. When I created the project and launched the first volume, I thought it was a meaningful space for mothers to remember their children. And we did. 21 children now live across these 7 volumes. Their stories have been preserved with care, their names spoken, their lives remembered in full color with hundreds of quotes, photos, and cherished memories. And I don't want to diminish that. That alone would have been enough. But something else was happening beneath the surface that has risen into view over time. With every story, each chapter, all of the photos, and every late night editing session, I was learning something about grief that I had not yet fully understood. I was learning that survival is not the goal. Hope is not the goal. Even healing is not the goal. These things matter deeply, but they are not where the journey stops. They are what help us reach that bridge. The bridge is where we begin asking different questions. How do I carry this love forward for the rest of my life? How do I continue a relationship that no longer looks the way it once did? How do I build a meaningful life while carrying unimaginable loss? How do I keep becoming? For years, I thought I was helping mothers tell stories, chronicle memories, and preserve pieces of their children's lives. What I now understand is that something much deeper was happening. Together, we were learning to move into a different relationship with grief itself, with our children and spirit. One rooted less in survival and more in connection, less in devastation and more in meaning, less in endings and far more in what continues. Because I remain in touch with many of these mothers years after their chapters were published, I have witnessed something I could not have seen in the moment. The deepest work of their chapters did not always happen immediately. Yes, they were impacted and changed in the weeks and months after we stopped meeting, after we published. But for most, it was in the months and years that followed that they began carrying what they discovered through the Legacy Project into their own becomings. Perhaps that is why ending the offering, the Legacy Project, feels both difficult and right. Not because the work is finished, and certainly not because love is finished, but because I can feel myself being called toward the next part of the journey with this community of moms and the children they carry forward. The project helped build the bridge, and now the work continues on the other side of it. Part 7, the seventh thread. As I sit here writing these final pages just weeks before Alex's 31st birthday, a few months before August 7th, 2026, a decade into my own after, I find myself returning to where this all began. To him. To my sweet, stubborn, gregarious Alex. To the young man with that enormous heart. His own goofy wit, a truly contagious laughter, the fullest hugs. Parker's AM to his PM. And the bright soul who continues to show up daily and often still surprises me even now. For years, I believed these chapters were about preserving pieces of Alex, and perhaps they were, at least in part. In no way do I think that preserving these stories and memories wasn't enough significance in and of itself. They are. But 7 volumes later, I can finally see that something much larger was happening. Each chapter captured a different thread. One explored his heart, another one his humor. One followed the synchronicities that continued after his death. Another gathered the voices of those who loved him. Still another explored the resilience his loss required of me, or told the story of his life through the language of baseball. And now this, the 7th thread, the thread that has quietly run beneath all the others. Love. The kind of love that remains when everything else has been stripped away. The kind that survives death. The kind that continues to teach, shape, guide, and transform. For 10 years, I have searched for ways to understand what it means to carry my son forward. What I know now is both simpler and deeper than anything I understood in the beginning. Legacy is not what we leave behind. Legacy is what we carry forward. It lives in the stories we tell, the lives we touch, the choices we make, and the people we become. Most of all, it lives in the love that continues long after physical life has ended. I used to think this project was about making sure Alex would be remembered. Now I understand that remembering was never really the point. The point was learning that love does not require remembering in order to endure. It simply does. Love is the point. 7 volumes, 21 children, 21 mothers, a decade of learning. And yet when I look back across all of it, the stories, the photographs, the tears and the laughter, those late night sessions, the friendships formed and the lives shared, I definitely don't just find a collection of books. I find love. Love carried by mothers who refuse to stop speaking their children's names. Love woven through every memory, every chapter, every photograph, every story told around a table or through tears on a Zoom screen. Love did not end when a life ended. Love that continued to teach, connect, guide, and transform all of us who were willing to follow where it led. Perhaps that was the lesson all along. Not that legacy is something we leave behind, but that legacy is love carried forward. I can see clearly now, and Alex saw it long before I did. that, fellow griever, was my chapter, the 7th thread. And this is why I wanted to share it here in this season, at this particular point in the conversation, because so much of what I'm talking about right now on Down the Rabbit Hole is this space beyond survival, the place where the questions begin to change, not because the grief is gone, or definitely not because we're done missing them, or because we have it all figured out, because when does that happen? But because at some point survival is no longer the only thing asking for our attention. At some point we begin asking things like, how do I carry this love forward and continue a relationship that no longer looks the way it once did? How do I live with the unanswered questions and still build a meaningful life with grief woven all the way through it? How do I let my child's life continue shaping me without letting the pain of their death become the only story I know how to tell? That, to me, is the bridge. And for me, the Legacy Project became one of the first real bridges I crossed after Alex died. And I didn't know it at the time. At the time, I thought I was helping moms preserve memories, like you heard me say, and I know I was. And I thought I was helping children be remembered. And that was also true. But like I said, something else was happening under the surface. We were all turning back towards our children's lives, which is what I would tell them, what I believed. But we were also turning back toward their love. We were learning that our relationship with them was not simply over because their physical life had ended. We were also, little by little, turning back towards parts of ourselves that were still alive and still capable of being shaped by love, still capable of becoming. I want to say this clearly because I think it matters a lot. Your bridge doesn't have to look like mine. It might. And if it does, that's beautiful. Some mothers do create nonprofits. Some become advocates, volunteers, group leaders, all sorts of things like coordinators and speakers. And I know moms that now educate. I know moms that sit on committees and help advocacy. Some get involved with organizations like AFSP. Some work with other suicide loss survivors like me. Some also do podcasts. Some work with youth mental health, and some create scholarships and foundations. All of these things happen. Some moms choose to write books and publish stories, and some build something public and visible in their child's name. And all of that matters. But that is not the only way love moves forward. For another mother, the bridge may be much quieter. It may be a garden, or a birthday or holiday ritual, a candle that gets lit every day, a morning prayer, a signs list, a playlist, a weekly walk in the woods. It could be a box of photographs finally gathered into one place, or a journal of letters that no one else ever reads. You might return to art or music or cooking or faith or a movement. You might move away from some of those things. A decision to say their child's name more often is also a way. A decision to laugh without apologizing for it. A decision to stop abandoning yourself inside of the grief. And honestly, many of us have more than one bridge. There are big bridges, the ones that change the shape of our lives. And then there are the smaller bridges along the way. You know, there's a bridge that took us from shock to breathing, one from silence to speaking their name. There was a bridge for me that took me from guilt to a softer, deeper truth. A bridge that did take me from survival into hope onto healing. And from healing, I started to evolve. And from there, a bridge into rebuilding and integration. All of those were not equal size bridges. There is definitely a bridge, and that's one of the bigger ones from who we were to who we're becoming. And for me, legacy work became one of those bridges, a big bridge. For you, it may be something entirely different, and that's okay. Because the point is not to do the grief the way someone else does it. The point is to begin noticing where love is still asking us to move. To notice when connection is still possible and when your child's life is still shaping you even now. The point is where your own life is still quietly calling you forward. That is what legacy work taught me. Not that grief ends, not that missing them gets solved, or even that ache for them to be here in the present still disappears. But the point is that love can still move and teach and connect. And that love can still come with us and be a part of who we're becoming. And I want to say this also. The 7th volume feels like a natural ending to this particular version of the Legacy Project for me. It didn't start out with a plan, like I said. I didn't begin this work thinking there'll be 7 books, 21 children, and this chapter will close. That is not at all how it happened. Like most things in my world, it unfolded and evolved and became what it was over time, just like the ending became clear to me over time. And while this specific offering has come to what feels like a natural completion, that doesn't mean I will never publish another anthology or support story or legacy work again. It simply means this version of the work has done what it came to do. And I now carry years of experience in writing, editing, layout design, self-publishing, and walking beside grieving mothers as they tell their stories of their children's lives. So I will quietly say this. If you're a mother listening and you feel called to write your child's story, create a legacy piece, shape their memories into something lasting, or even work toward publishing a book of your own, this is one way I could still support you. You can find the information in the Work With Me part of my page on my website, and I'll include all of it in the show notes. I don't really want to go into it here, but I haven't ever mentioned that, and it's something that's been sitting quietly on my website for a while. And maybe you're not ready for anything that specific, and that's okay too. I've also included links to the show notes, to my free monthly spaces for grieving mothers. And if you're an earlier survival space and simply need somewhere soft to land, the You Are Not Alone Mom's monthly support space is always free. It's a gathering for moms navigating child loss by suicide. But if you're beginning to ask the deeper now what question, who am I now? How do I carry this? How do I begin rebuilding? The bridge sessions inside the rebuilding room may be a beautiful next space for you. That space is also monthly and free as well. And I created it specifically for grieving moms to learn how to live forward after loss. Like I said, I just respond to the needs as I see them. And I will tell you that the response to this group since it began tells me how deeply it's needed. All of the ways to connect with me, work with me, read the legacy books, or join these free spaces will be linked in the show notes. And you're always welcome to reach out to me. If you would like to read Volume 7 of the Legacy Project or explore other legacy books, I'll include that information too. Every single one of them is so worth reading. Reading about other mothers' children never, ever gets tiring to me. These books are filled with real children and real stories and real mothers and real love. They're just so incredible. And whether you followed the Legacy Project from the beginning or you're just discovering it now, I hope these stories remind you that our children were so much more than the way they died. They lived, they loved, they mattered, and they still do. So before you go, please, if this episode resonated with you, please follow the show so you don't miss future episodes. And if you're able to, please like, rate, or review, or more importantly, share this episode with another grieving person who may need it. That helps. The leftover pieces reach more people who are learning how to live after loss. I appreciate all of this more than you know. I appreciate you listening. I hope you found some comfort or some meaning. I always say, and I mean, please take what serves you and leave the rest. And I want you to leave today with this final thought from this chapter. Legacy is not what we leave behind. Legacy is the love we carry forward. Talk soon.